Welcome to Wednesday, October 27th, 2021. Cool and windy is going to be a good way to describe the next couple of days across the interior west. The sun will be back out. Temperatures actually aren't going to be all that bad for late October, but we're going to be quite windy along and east of the Continental Divide today and tomorrow. Northwest winds aloft make it windy on the plains. Northwest winds aloft, though, will bring snow showers to the high mountains of the region today. Friday is the best day. Friday's one of those days where it warms up, the sun's out, the winds die down. We call it a sucker hole because Friday's going to pull you in thinking that we've got another nice long stretch of good weather coming, but it's just about a day and a half because temperatures begin to fall from the north to south beginning as early as Saturday, especially for folks in Montana, northern Wyoming, and the Dakotas, and then into Sunday and Monday, the cold air spreads south and east. Potential is there for some big early November cold. Now, some of you may not see this in your long-range forecasts on your apps yet, or your favorite website, or maybe your favorite cable weather channel, because what we're anticipating isn't necessarily in the models yet. But we'll talk about that here going forward. Today's satellite photo shows the California storm system getting stretched out north to south, but it's amazing. Just 2 days ago, the system was here. That is a lot of real estate to travel as it's getting pulled along by those very strong jet stream winds. So this is going to actually help reform a new low here that will bring colder, wet weather to eastern parts of the United States here over the next couple of days, while the weather kind of in the west catches its breath briefly. Here's the upper level low. You can see it being stretched out, but high pressure beginning to build into California. You will notice, though, that the winds aloft are coming in from the northwest. So that's going to be what's going to make it windy. You see all these black lines close together. There's a big difference in air pressure. So you're going to get windy conditions along and east of the divide today and tomorrow. But as that system expands and forms that low there, we see a high pressure ridge temporarily build over the Intermountain West and Four Corners area for Friday. This is why Friday is the day to take advantage of Play Hooky Day. Friday is Play Hooky Day. Going to be a really, really nice day. But as we showed you yesterday, this little kink right here could end up becoming a big kink in the system as we get into later in the weekend and early next week. We've got a developing area of low pressure here. We have high pressure wanting to build in behind it. And we've got a lot of cold air along the north slope of Alaska, back into Siberia, building up here that just needs a reason to head south. And one of the reasons, this is something we showed you about 2 weeks ago, I think, that we were looking at the potential for the stratosphere in the polar regions to get warmer. And when the stratosphere goes through this stratospheric warming process, it expands the atmosphere. Basically what it does is, like an accordion, the atmosphere expands due to the warmer stratosphere, which then pushes the colder air that's up in the northern latitudes south off the poles and into the lower latitudes. It can go in any direction, but a lot of times it'll get kind of squeezed in one or two particular directions. So the stratospheric warming trend is coinciding exactly with the colder weather that we see coming early next week. And this is not the only event we'll see this fall and winter season. They take a while to evolve, so they don't happen frequently. This one is actually going to fade in early November, may come back again in early December. We'll watch out for that. As we look at the forecast for Halloween Sunday, so the 18,000-foot winds, the 500 millibar chart here shows this sharp ridge building along the west coast of British Columbia, allowing the air to be displaced southward. So what will happen is the air that's currently here now and back up to here, by Sunday, this ridge pushes up that cold air, especially on the surface, and displaces it. You can see the wind barbs here coming in from the north-northwest again. So when you get a high here along the west coast, the door opens to Canada. And we've got this other little low right here, which is going to carry along with it some Pacific moisture. So as we go forward, we're going to see colder air push through Alberta, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, into Montana and the western Dakotas as early as Saturday. And by Thursday of next week, the 4th of November, we see a consolidation of this low and a consolidation of some really cold air building right here. Now, whether or not it's this intense, we don't know yet. A lot of times I'll tell you that trend is your friend, and trend is our friend in the sense we see all the right elements to bring much colder weather in to the central and western United States. But a lot of times these big cold outbreaks, you kind of need to have all the stars align. Everything kind of needs to work together to get that to happen. So the trend is definitely colder. The trend also shows there should be some rain and it should snow in many areas with this colder weather. What we're looking at now are the details. How cold will it get and how much snow are we going to get? It's the details we got to figure out. But our confidence is really growing that colder weather, the coldest weather of the fall season, is coming. I want to show you how this evolves. These are temperature anomalies for Friday afternoon, and you can see this little swath of warmer than average temperatures getting pushed out along and east of the divide here by Friday. This is why Friday is going to be such a nice day. But you can see the blue and the green up here, the colder weather that's up there. By Saturday afternoon, you can see the cold air begins to leak in out of western Canada, and the colder temperatures relative to average by Saturday afternoon get all the way to the Colorado-Wyoming border. So Colorado and western Kansas down here will squeeze in another warm day Saturday, while temperatures begin to get colder here in the northern Rockies as the cold air spills down and along and east of the Continental Divide. By Sunday afternoon, you can see it's past the Palmer Divide, now down into Colorado Springs. And that's going to evolve into some colder weather down there. And you can see along the Cheyenne Ridge here and along and east of the mountains, and also west of the Continental Divide now, spilling into northwest Colorado, southwestern Wyoming, and even into Utah. This is where you can get those strong canyon winds pushing into Salt Lake and across Sweetwater County, Wyoming. You can get some pretty high winds when these cold fronts come in like that. As that cold air spills over, that little low I showed you coming from the Pacific Northwest will throw some moisture on top of that. That's called overrunning, where cold air on the ground is overrun by warmer, moist air from the west. And the end result is we're going to see developing areas of rain and snow. This is through Monday. You can see that low brings west coast rain again, and along and east of the divide, we're going to see that moisture hit the colder air. And the end result, this is by next Friday. By next Friday, you can see a large area of snowfall, even in eastern Colorado, Denver, Pueblo, Colorado Springs, Goodland, Kansas. Snow, could it be snowing that far south into Texas? Maybe. It's possible, as we see some really cold air with this system. The details need to be sorted out, as I mentioned earlier, so do expect these maps to change. Again, what I'm showing you here are trends. And speaking of trends, look at these temperature trends relative to average. Where you see purple, temperatures relative to normal are 25 to 35 degrees below average. This is by Thursday. This is a very impressive outbreak of cold across the lower 48 states, all the way to the Gulf Coast. And then look at this by Friday. Look at all that purple. I mean, this is really, really cold relative to average. And this is the type of cold that certainly can move markets. As we go out and take a look at where the displacement occurs across the northern hemisphere. I know this is a very busy map, but I just kind of want to illustrate what happens in these big outbreaks, especially during La Nina seasons, when you have highly amplified jet streams that causes these major displacements of warm and cold across the northern hemisphere. Here's a classic example. This is by next Friday. The lower 48 of the United States is really cold. On the other side of the globe, directly opposite, notice in China, and notice here another big outbreak of cold right here. You get these, well, we could call it a situation, kind of looks like a dumbbell here, but in between, what you have are warmer than average temperature conditions. This is classic. Now, the red that you see over Alaska and the parts of northwest Canada and up here over the North Pole doesn't mean they're warm. What it's showing is it's warmer than the 30-year average. These anomaly maps I show you all the time are good ways to represent where the warm and the cold conditions are going to be. And when you compare them relative to averages, it's just a good way to highlight where things are. So that stratospheric warming event is sending the cold air basically in two directions. Over onto this side of the northern hemisphere, and then on this side of the northern hemisphere. And then if you look on the other sides, you notice it's warmer. And what will happen is through the course of the winter, you'll see a rotation of these warmer and colder conditions that will happen throughout the course of the year of the fall and the winter season. But a lot of times your confidence grows on these big outbreaks of cold when they happen like this on either side of the hemisphere. The Arctic oscillation, this is what we call a teleconnection, to where we start to look at the differences in air pressure between the Arctic and the lower latitudes. And it's a good way to see where the cold air is going to be moving. This Arctic oscillation is one of these patterns that we will bring up throughout the course of the cold season, as it is sometimes an indicator of what's to come. When the Arctic oscillation goes into a negative phase, anything below zero here, colder air tends to come out of the higher latitudes to the lower latitudes. So this also is syncing up very well with what's coming this weekend and well into the early parts of next week, and maybe even longer than that. If you were to look at the latest ice and snow cover across the northern hemisphere, you can see the expansion of snow in the Yukon, Alaska, the Northwest Territories, and look at the snow cover now expanding in Siberia and over there. Cold air really beginning to build up over those cold air land masses where the snow cover is the most extensive. I want to give you a little bit of a sea surface temperature update to show you the contrast, the differences, really key differences from where we are now with sea surface temperatures in the Pacific and where we were a year ago. There's similarities and there's some big differences. And the big differences will end up being a big driver this winter season. This is the latest sea surface temperature anomaly, showing the significant cold along the equator and the basic La Nina, the La Nina here strengthening as we expected it would be. Then we have this warm pool right here in the North Atlantic, North Pacific rather, and then we have these colder than average sea surface temperatures in the Gulf of Alaska. And that contrast between these two will continue to generate more storms and strong jet stream winds across the North Pacific for a while longer. Let's compare to where we were exactly a year ago. Notice the similarities. There's La Nina. It is right in place to where it was a year ago, like it is now. But you probably have already noticed the warm temperature anomalies from Hawaii to the West Coast to the Gulf of Alaska. Look how much warmer it was a year ago. That's why the fall so far has been much different in 2021 than the fall of 2020. Things are different out there in the Pacific. So the colder Pacific waters here off the West Coast with this warm pool here will be generating more West Coast moisture into the month of November, and some of that's going to be getting into the northern Rockies. So these sea surface temperature anomalies going to be playing a big role. There is a significant drop in sea surface temperatures, not only in the Pacific, but in other parts of the globe over the past year. And it'll be interesting to see how that affects the winter season. It likely will across North America. Have yourself a great Wednesday. We'll have more discussion on this cold wave for you tomorrow.